Now, a little trivia question for you. That was cut on Final Cut. Completely joking. So, so let's talk a little bit about Apple. Let's move up a little bit from Final Cut 10. And obviously, one of the benchmarks, at least from my perspective, being part of an integration facility, is that when you put a product out there, there's support and there's a back end to it, and you know that in a year there's going to be that support. You know, in a year that if you need to call on someone, you can. We obviously all know that Apple Computer changed their name to Apple Computer. We all know that they're making a lot of money off iPhones and a lot of portable devices. So, was there any fear amongst anyone on the panel that the Pro in Final Cut Pro or the support for professional-based products is going to go away?
Let me share with you a conversation that I had with Apple. Just to put this in context, I had the pleasure of meeting with Apple in February for the first time ever. They let me see something that was happening before it was released. And as many of you may know, I had the opportunity to see the first version of Final Cut 10 as part of a small group of people that Apple invited to Cupertino. I'd love to say that I'm on a first-name basis with Steve Jobs, but aside from the fact that he and I sat in the same room at the same time in 1994, that's the closest I've ever met to meeting him. And I'm not. I've never been beta tester of any of their software, nor have I been released on anything, except for this one life-changing experience. And one of the things that they stressed when they met me in February, and they met again, I talked with them after the presentation, NAB, and then after the launch of Final Cut 10, I was on a long phone call with them, discussing how badly the launch was screwed up. And I said, why are you calling Final Cut Pro Final Cut Pro? And they said, because it is our plan that we want this to be for the professional user. Now, without a question, there's a lot of debate as to whether Apple has achieved that or not, and there's lots of people on both sides of the equation. But Apple has told me at the highest levels of the company that they want this program to be for the professional user. Having said that, I think they did everything they could at the launch to alienate everybody in their audience. I think what happened is Final Cut 10, if Final Cut 10 sat there, just sitting there, and Final Cut 7 was happily running away and doing its thing, and Server was running, and Studio Pro was there, and DVD Studio Pro, and all that was just great, and they didn't change it. And we looked at Final Cut 10, we'd be all over it saying this is the greatest thing since the invention of sliced bread. I can't wait for this little baby to grow up. But what happened is, at the launch, they canceled Final Cut Studio 3, killed off all those products, and said, like it or not, you got to live with the baby. This is just brain dead. And I have shared that in print and with Apple. They screwed up the launch, and in so doing, they've tainted Final Cut 10. I think if they ran Final Cut 7 and Final Cut 10 side by side for a year and a half and gave 10 a chance to grow up, you couldn't keep it in stock. Now, can't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, I think Apple did a really good job with this program outside of other, if you don't compare it to other editing programs. I guess what I'm saying
That's a real low bar you're setting there.
It's a great word processor.
Yeah, you compare it to Final Cut 7, and it loses a lot of the functionality that professional editors need, and that pissed off a lot of people. But if you can put your anger aside and look at this program, they've done some pretty amazing things with it. Just not having to wait for when you click on a sequence for to prepare for video. I don't know if anyone's been stuck in that. You know, like you click and you wait 2 minutes, it's obnoxious, and stuff like that is gone, rendering's gone, it's in the back. It just, there are amazing things in this program, but we have to wait. And one of the problems in the past was anyone who used to work, I still work on Avid, but anyone who worked on Avid before Final Cut knows as soon as Final Cut became ready for broadcast, it was forced upon a lot of us at our jobs. As editors, it would be nice if we got to choose which system we were going to work with, but a lot of the time you come in and they tell you, okay, this is a Final Cut show, this is an Avid show, and they ask you how you feel about it. You're like, great, because you want the job. But you know, they're like, do you have a preference? You're like, no, you've already made the decision. So yeah, so a lot of people remember that, and they think that, hey, this is the next thing that's going to get forced on us, and I think a lot of the anger comes out of that. But like Larry said, if we give it time to grow up, I think we'll have a way more powerful program than we have with 7. So a lot of the things that make you angry about 7 now will disappear, and I don't know. What remains to be seen is what Avid does with Media Composer 6, though, because that may rival Final Cut 10 without losing the functionality that 7 lost when it jumped to 10. It's funny because like when Apple put out QuickTime 10, you lost some functionality from QuickTime 7, like your setting in points. And I don't use QuickTime 10 anymore because you have to go back to 7 to do certain things in editorial. So,
but I'm maybe a bit more cynical about all of this than you guys are. But I think Apple's a public company. Because I'm way older than everyone else here. And back when Ford Motor Company started, they're a company, man. They can do whatever the hell they want to increase their profits. And I think they made an intelligent business decision. I don't know what pro means exactly, except someone who makes the bulk of their money off of something. And I think they may be redirecting their definition of pro. They can do that. That's okay. They're a big company. I remember when Avid decided they were getting off the Mac platform and going to go PC only. And there was such an uproar in the editing community that it eventually changed Avid's approach to it. But that was a business decision that a big company's allowed to make. And I have the right not to go along with them if it's a tool that I don't see capable of doing some of the things that I want. So I don't think that, listen, Apple may be one of the more secretive companies, but it's not like Avid's announcing what happens in 6.0 later on this year. They're not really discussing that in public either. Adobe could change how they they've changed their packaging, they've changed everything, so that I think that I can't count on a company being here in a year or two. I think third-party support is really important, and third-party training is important, and these are the kinds of things that will keep all of these NLEs going. And that's where you have to look to eventually, not to whether Apple's going to answer my support calls, because that's kind of a lost cause, isn't it?
Well, go ahead, Mike.
Apple is obviously becoming a mobile devices company. Mm-hmm. This is sort of their motif. This is how their products are developing. And if you look at how they're sort of examining problems like a room full of CDs, now they said, well, we have a way to put that in your pocket. And you're taking existing markets and that you weren't in before, and you're modifying them and making them more mobile. One of the things that I found that's very good about that is some people would argue, well, they've made millions of iPads and how many tens of thousands of apps that are available, but not all those are at the pro level. And of course, you jokingly, and I agree, what does pro mean? And that's sort of an Orwellian term. Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't joking at all, actually.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that pro is really rubbery when you start talking about this.
But what I found that I think is really neat, consider this in terms of how Final Cut 10 is sort of built. One of the things that I noticed right off the bat is that the system doesn't require nearly the level of left-hand keyboard support as it did with any other NLE system. And what I was realizing, and it took me a lot of hours to work with it because I had to start learning habits. You know how habits work, right? You start getting muscle memory. You can't open up a program, you can't open up anything, you can't open a lawnmower and feel comfortable with it the first 5 minutes of using it. You need to spend hours and hours and hours so you can actually plot data points, many of those subconscious data points. And actually then you can audit, how do I feel? What do I think? Mm-hmm. And I don't think a lot of people have done that. I do that with software and hardware all day long. So Final Cut 10, I actually used it quite a bit, and then opened some blogs, and I was like, oh my gosh, there was, it was I had no idea this was happening. It was sort of like waking, sleeping through September 11th and waking up the 12th and having no idea, And in doing that, what I realized after many hours of spending time with it, this application is the genesis of gesture recognition manipulation of images. And I have never experienced that type of potential before. And it's not 100% there by any means. But whether you're left-handed or right-handed, the opposite hand begins to become dormant and less necessary. and less practical. And all of a sudden I realized that's how I use my phone. My phone is a one-handed device. My iPad is a one-handed device. My remote control is a one-handed device. And all of a sudden I realized this is part of an architecture that is trying to embrace and teach behaviors as how we will as society operate life in the future. And that is going to easily work its way down into the storytelling physical processes. And I think that's one thing that really, really excited me about what they're thinking. And when you think about what did I just say and what does that really mean, what it means is this is as deep as it is wide. This program, this idea.
That's probably one of the coolest things I've ever heard. Seriously. And I need to think about that. And while I think about that, we got to take another break. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Stay with us.
We're always shooting with different formats, different frame rates, and the HP Workstation for us is always that solution.
I'll color correct off the dream color. You can see the nuances and the color in that monitor better than anything else I've seen.
You have extensive usage of NVIDIA graphics cards. You have a workstation that you can run a feature film through.